The bright morning sun streamed through the airport windows as Dr. Amara Johnson wheeled her carry-on through the bustling terminal. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of the 12-hour emergency surgery she'd performed the night before. Still, she walked with purpose, her white coat folded neatly in her bag alongside her presentation materials for the medical conference in Chicago. Last call for boarding, Flight 247 to Chicago. The announcement echoed overhead. Amara quickened her pace, reaching the gate just in time. She handed her boarding pass to the agent, who smiled warmly. "Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Enjoy your flight." She made her way down the jet bridge, the familiar weight of her medical badge hanging around her neck. As one of the few black female neurosurgeons in the country, Amara had learned to wear her credentials visibly, not out of pride, but necessity. Too often, people questioned whether she belonged in the spaces she'd worked so hard to enter. The flight attendant greeted her at the door of the plane. "Good morning, Dr. Johnson. You're in seat 3A, first class, just on your right." "Thank you," Amara replied, making her way down the aisle. First class was a rare treat, but the hospital had insisted on the upgrade for this trip. After saving a senator's daughter with a groundbreaking procedure last month, Amara had been invited as the keynote speaker at the National Neurosurgery Conference. Her research on pediatric brain trauma was changing the field, though Amara cared less about the recognition and more about the children she could help. She found her seat and placed her small carry-on in the overhead bin. An older white man in an expensive suit occupied the window seat, tapping away on his laptop. He barely glanced up as she settled beside him. "Excuse me," Amara said politely. "I'm in the aisle seat." The man looked up briefly, his eyes doing a quick scan from her face to her simple blouse and slacks. He seemed to make an immediate judgment, his expression shifting subtly before he returned to his screen. "Of course," Amara ignored the dismissive tone. After 15 years in medicine, she'd developed a thick skin. She took her seat, pulled out her tablet, and began reviewing her presentation notes. More passengers filed onto the plane, the usual mix of business travelers and vacationers. A young black girl, perhaps 11 or 12, walked by with her mother. The girl's eyes widened with recognition when she spotted Amara's medical badge, and she gave a small, shy wave. Amara smiled warmly and waved back, her heart lifting. This was why representation mattered. Once everyone was seated, the lead flight attendant came through the first-class cabin offering pre-takeoff drinks. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" she asked Amara's seatmate first. "Sparkling water with lime," he said without looking up. "Certainly, Mr. Whitfield." The flight attendant knew him by name, a frequent flyer. Amara guessed. She then turned to Amara with the same professional smile. "And for you, Dr. Johnson?" "Just water, please." "Of course, doctor." "I saw your badge. May I ask what field you're in?" "Neurosurgery," Amara replied. The flight attendant's eyes lit up. "My nephew had brain surgery last year at Children's Memorial. The doctors there were amazing." "That's actually where I work," Amara said with a warm smile. "Really? What a small world. I'll be right back with your waters." As the flight attendant walked away, Amara noticed her seatmate had stopped typing. He was looking at her now, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else, something harder, more skeptical. "You're a neurosurgeon?" His tone made it sound more like an accusation than a question. Amara had heard this tone hundreds of times before. She kept her voice even. "Yes, I am. I lead the pediatric neurosurgery department at Memorial." The man, Whitfield, the flight attendant had called him, gave a small scoff. "Interesting. I didn't realize they were being so progressive with their hiring these days." The comment hung in the air between them, its meaning unmistakable. Amara felt a familiar heaviness in her chest, the weight of having to justify her existence in spaces where people like her were rare. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the young black girl from earlier watching from her seat across the aisle, close enough to have heard the exchange. The girl's expression fell slightly, her earlier excitement dimming. Amara thought of her own childhood, how rarely she'd seen doctors who looked like her, and how each discouraging comment had nearly derailed her dreams. She thought of her mentor, Dr. Rivera, who had taught her that sometimes the strongest response wasn't anger, but calm dignity. The flight attendant returned with their drinks, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Here you are. Dr. Johnson, I meant to ask, are you heading to Chicago for the big medical conference? I heard they're featuring some groundbreaking new procedures. Before Amara could answer, Whitfield interjected. She's probably just attending, not presenting. He gave a small dismissive laugh. The flight attendant looked confused. Oh, Actually, Amara said calmly, meeting Whitfield's gaze directly for the first time. I'm the keynote speaker. My team pioneered a new approach to treating traumatic brain injuries in children. We've increased survival rates by nearly 40%. A few nearby passengers had started listening to the conversation. An older woman in the row behind them leaned forward slightly, her expression disapproving, though Amara couldn't tell if the disapproval was directed at her or at Whitfield's comments. Whitfield's face tightened. He was a handsome man in his 50s, the kind whose presence typically commanded respect without question. His watch alone probably cost more than Amara's monthly mortgage payment. He was clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. Well, he said after a moment, I suppose they need diverse perspectives these days. The emphasis he placed on diverse made it clear he wasn't referring to intellectual diversity. The plane began taxiing toward the runway. The flight attendants started their safety demonstration, but the tension between Amara and Whitfield remained palpable. Amara glanced again at the young girl across the aisle, who was still watching the interaction with wide eyes. In that moment, Amara made a decision. This wasn't just about her. It was about that girl, and every child who needed to see that people like them belonged everywhere, even in places where others tried to make them feel unwelcome. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Amara took a deep breath. The flight to Chicago would take 2 hours. 2 hours next to a man who had already decided she didn't deserve her success. Her position, her seat beside him. She had two choices. She could ignore him, put in her earbuds and retreat into her own world, or she could engage. She could show that young girl watching what it looked like to stand firm with grace. The plane lifted off the ground, the pressure pushing Amara back into her seat. Beside her, Whitfield had reopened his laptop, seemingly eager to end their interaction. Not so fast, Amara thought. She had spent her entire career carving out space for herself, where others said she didn't belong. 2 hours on a plane? That was nothing. Mr. Whitfield, is it? Amara's voice was calm but clear. I believe we got off on the wrong foot. I'm Dr. Amara Johnson, head of pediatric neurosurgery at Memorial Hospital. And you are? Whitfield looked up, momentarily thrown by her direct approach. For the briefest moment, uncertainty flickered across his face. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Whatever Whitfield might say next, Amara was ready. This conversation was just beginning. James Whitfield straightened in his seat, clearly caught off guard by Amara's direct approach. His fingers hovered over his laptop keyboard as he seemed to calculate his response. James Whitfield, CEO of Apex Technologies, he finally replied, not offering his hand. His voice carried the practiced confidence of someone used to introducing himself in boardrooms, where his name alone commanded respect. Nice to meet you, Amara said, though they both knew she was being polite. What takes you to Chicago? James hesitated, then closed his laptop halfway. Quarterly board meeting. We're expanding our medical software division. His eyes flicked to her badge again. Though I doubt you work much with the technical side of things in your position. Amara noticed how he paused before saying position, as if carefully choosing a word to replace what he really wanted to say. She'd heard this dance of words before, the careful stepping around explicitly offensive language while still making implications crystal clear. Actually, she replied, I led the committee that selected our hospital's new neuroimaging software last year. The integration of AI in detecting early stroke indicators has improved our response time by nearly 30%. A middle-aged woman across the aisle looked over with interest. Sorry to interrupt, but did you say AI in stroke detection? My mother had a stroke last year. Amara turned to her with a warm smile, grateful for the widening of their conversation. Yes, the technology has come remarkably far. It can now detect subtle signs that even experienced radiologists might miss on a first review. That's fascinating, the woman said. James cleared his throat, clearly annoyed at losing control of the conversation. Our company's software does something similar, though more advanced. We're implementing it in major hospitals across the country. He directed this comment to the woman, not to Amara. Which hospitals? Amara asked innocently. James blinked. Several in the Northeast to start. We're in talks with Memorial, actually. Interesting. I sit on Memorial's Technology Acquisition Committee, and I don't recall seeing Apex in our recent evaluations. Amara kept her tone light, but she was making a point. The woman across the aisle raised her eyebrows slightly, sensing the tension. The young black girl a few rows ahead had twisted in her seat to listen, her eyes moving between Amara and James like she was watching a tennis match. James's jaw tightened. He was clearly not used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had already dismissed. We're in preliminary discussions. Your hospital's bureaucracy moves slowly. We're thorough, Amara corrected. When you're dealing with patients' lives, cutting corners isn't an option. The flight attendant approached with a drink cart, providing a momentary pause in their increasingly tense conversation. Can I get you anything else to drink? Coffee, black, James said curtly. I'll have orange juice, please, Amara said with a smile. As the flight attendant poured their drinks, Amara noticed James checking his watch impatiently. Once the attendant moved on, James turned to Amara with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. So, Dr. Johnson, I'm curious. How did you find yourself in neurosurgery? It's not exactly a common field for... He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. For women? For black doctors? Amara completed his thought. You can say it directly, Mr. Whitfield. I'm used to it. A faint flush crept up James's neck. I simply meant it's a demanding specialty. It is, Amara agreed. I knew I wanted to be a neurosurgeon when I was 12. My younger brother had a brain tumor. She paused, the memory still vivid despite the years. The surgeon who saved his life was a black woman, Dr. Hathaway. Seeing her walk into our hospital room, confident, brilliant, kind, changed everything for me. She made me believe it was possible. For a moment, James seemed at a loss for words. Personal stories had a way of disrupting preconceptions, even if only temporarily. The girl who had been watching them leaned further into the aisle, nearly falling out of her seat in her eagerness to hear more. Her mother gently pulled her back, whispering something in her ear, but the girl's eyes remained fixed on Amara. And your brother? James finally asked, his voice marginally softer. He recovered? He did. He's a civil engineer now. Builds bridges, Amara smiled. Literal bridges, though I suppose I'm more in the business of building figurative ones. James didn't return the smile. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, Dr. Johnson, I think you've misinterpreted my comments. I have nothing against diversity in the workplace. In fact, my company has several diversity initiatives. Several diversity initiatives, Amara repeated slowly. I see. What's that supposed to mean? It means initiatives are a start, but they're not the same as genuine inclusion or respect. Amara kept her voice even. When you immediately questioned my credentials simply because I don't look like what you expect a neurosurgeon to look like, that speaks volumes about the culture you likely foster at your company. James's face hardened. That's an unfair assessment. You don't know me or my company. You're right, I don't, Amara conceded. And you don't know me. Yet you felt comfortable making assumptions about how I got my position. The businessman in the row behind them cleared his throat loudly, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation happening just inches away. But Amara noticed that several passengers were listening intently, including an elderly couple who had stopped their crossword puzzle to tune in. James lowered his voice. I apologize if my comments came across as insensitive. That wasn't my intention. Amara recognized the non-apology for what it was, a way to appear reasonable without acknowledging any actual wrongdoing. I appreciate that, Mr. Whitfield, but perhaps consider that impact matters more than intention. James looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. Instead, he reopened his laptop, a clear signal that he considered the conversation over. But Amara wasn't finished. Not when she could feel the young girl's eyes still on her. Not when she thought of all the times she had let similar comments slide because confrontation felt too exhausting. Sometimes staying silent was necessary for self-preservation, but other times, speaking up wasn't just for herself. You mentioned your company is developing medical software, she said, preventing James from retreating back into his work. I'm actually quite interested in the intersection of technology and medicine. What specific problems is your software trying to solve? The question was genuine, and it seemed to catch James off guard. He had clearly expected more confrontation, not professional curiosity. We're developing predictive algorithms for treatment outcomes based on patient data. he said cautiously. Fascinating. How are you accounting for historical bias in medical data? As I'm sure you know, medical records have traditionally underrepresented certain populations, which can lead to algorithms that perpetuate those biases. James stared at her, clearly not expecting such a specific technical question. We have a team working on that aspect. I'd love to hear more, Amara pressed. This is exactly the kind of work that requires diverse perspectives, wouldn't you agree? Especially given how medical biases have historically affected treatment for women and people of color. The woman across the aisle nodded emphatically. My sister was misdiagnosed 3 times before they figured out she had lupus. The doctor kept saying it was just stress. Exactly, Amara said. Those kinds of biases get built into data and then into algorithms if we're not careful. James's expression was difficult to read. There was annoyance there, certainly, but also a flicker of something else, perhaps reluctant respect. Our data scientists are aware of these issues, he said stiffly. And how diverse is your data science team? Amara asked. The flight hit a patch of turbulence, causing the plane to dip suddenly. The seatbelt sign dinged on. The interruption gave James a moment to compose himself, but the question hung in the air between them. When the turbulence subsided, James turned to face Amara directly for the first time. If you must know, our tech department is predominantly white and Asian men. It's an industry-wide issue not specific to Apex. And yet industry-wide issues require industry leaders to drive change. Amara countered. As a CEO, you're in a unique position to do that. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, announcing they were beginning their initial descent into Chicago. Just 1 hour into the flight, and already the conversation had gone places neither of them had anticipated. James studied Amara for a long moment. You're very direct, Dr. Johnson. I've found it saves time, she replied. And in surgery, time is often the difference between life and death. The young girl was still watching them, her eyes wide with admiration as she observed Amara holding her ground. In that moment, Amara knew that whatever came next in this conversation, it had already been worth it. The plane began its descent toward Chicago, the city skyline appearing through breaks in the clouds. James turned to look out the window, seemingly grateful for the distraction. The brief silence between them felt heavier than the pressurized cabin air. You know, Amara said, breaking the quiet, I've been where you are. James turned back to her, eyebrows raised. I doubt that very much, Dr. Johnson. Not exactly where you are, she clarified. But I know what it's like to have your worldview challenged unexpectedly. It's uncomfortable. The flight attendant passed through the cabin, checking seatbelts, momentarily pausing their conversation. Amara noticed the young girl was still watching them intently. Her mother had given up trying to distract her and now sat reading a magazine, occasionally glancing at her daughter with a mixture of concern and pride. I don't think my worldview has been challenged, James said once they were alone again. I think you've mischaracterized me based on a few comments. Amara nodded thoughtfully. Maybe, but let me tell you a story and you can decide if it sounds familiar. She shifted in her seat to face him more directly. During my first year of residency, I had a patient, elderly black woman, came in with textbook symptoms of a subdural hematoma. I ordered the standard test, but the attending physician questioned every decision I made, suggesting alternative diagnoses that didn't fit the symptoms. James listened, his expression guarded but attentive. When the test results confirmed exactly what I'd said, he seemed almost disappointed. Later, I overheard him tell another resident that I probably just got lucky, that I couldn't possibly have that kind of diagnostic instinct so early in my training. Amara paused. It took me months to realize that his surprise wasn't about my experience level. It was about who I was. That's a single incident, James countered. Hardly evidence of systemic issues. You're right, Amara agreed, surprising him. A single incident proves nothing. But it wasn't just one incident. It was a new patient asking to see the real doctor when I walked into the room. It was being mistaken for the janitorial staff while wearing scrubs and a white coat. It was having my research questioned more rigorously than my colleagues at conferences. It was a pattern, Mr. Whitfield. And patterns tell stories. The plane dipped lower, the landing gear deploying with a mechanical groan. Around them, passengers began collecting their belongings, but many were still clearly listening to their conversation. What's your point exactly? James asked. his defensiveness softening slightly. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing," Amara said simply. "I'm not trying to shame you or make you feel guilty. I'm just asking you to consider how your assumptions might affect people. Not just me, but everyone who works for you. Everyone you interact with." The young girl across the aisle was practically vibrating with excitement now. She whispered something to her mother, who hesitated, then nodded. The girl unbuckled her seatbelt and approached their row, stopping beside Amara's seat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "Are you really a brain surgeon?" Amara smiled warmly. "I am. My name is Dr. Johnson." "I'm Zoe," the girl replied. "I want to be a doctor too. Mom says I'm good at science." "That's wonderful, Zoe. The world needs more doctors who are good at science." Zoe glanced nervously at James, then back to Amara. "I heard what that man said to you. My teacher says some people don't think girls like us can be doctors or scientists." James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly very interested in his phone. "Your teacher is right that some people think that way," Amara said gently. "But they're wrong. You can be anything you set your mind to, especially if you're good at science." "Do people say mean things to you a lot?" Zoe asked, her innocence making the question all the more powerful. Amara considered her answer carefully, aware of all the ears listening. "Sometimes. But for every person who doubts me, there are many more who support me, and the most important thing is that I believe in myself." Zoe nodded solemnly, as if memorizing this wisdom. "I'm going to be a doctor who fixes hearts. Do you think I can do that?" "I have absolutely no doubt," Amara said. "Would you like my card? If you ever have questions about becoming a doctor, your mom can email me." Zoe's eyes widened as Amara reached into her purse and produced a business card. She accepted it reverently, as if being handed a precious jewel. "Thank you, Dr. Johnson," she exclaimed before hurrying back to her seat, already showing the card to her mother. The plane was making its final approach now, the ground rushing up to meet them. James had watched the entire exchange with Zoe, his expression unreadable. "You just made that girl's day," he said finally. "Sometimes all it takes is seeing someone who looks like you doing the thing you dream of doing," Amara replied. "Representation matters." The plane touched down with a gentle bump, then the roar of engines as the pilots engaged the reverse thrusters. As they taxied toward the gate, James surprised Amara by speaking again. "My daughter is 14, he said, his voice quieter than before. "She wants to study engineering, but her school counselor suggested she consider something more suitable for girls." Amara's eyebrows rose. "And what did you say to that?" "I was furious. I told the counselor my daughter could do anything she set her mind to." James paused, the irony of his words clearly dawning on him. "I see your point. It's different when it's someone you love," Amara said. "The unfairness becomes personal." "But it should be personal anyway," James admitted. "Whether it's my daughter or someone else's." The seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began standing, retrieving bags from overhead bins. The cramped confines of the airplane suddenly felt even smaller as people pressed into the aisle. "I owe you an apology, Dr. Johnson," James said, the words clearly difficult for him, a real one this time. "My comments were inappropriate." Amara studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity, but found none. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield, I appreciate that." As they stood to exit the plane, James hesitated. "I'd actually be interested in hearing more about those biases in medical algorithms you mentioned. Our development team probably could use some different perspectives." "I'd be happy to connect you with some colleagues who specialize in that area," Amara offered. They made their way down the aisle, the usual post-flight shuffle slowing their progress. Zoe and her mother were a few passengers ahead. Zoe turned and gave Amara an enthusiastic wave, which Amara returned with a smile. In the jetway, James pulled a business card from his wallet and offered it to Amara. "If you're serious about those connections, my email is on there and—" He paused, seeming to wrestle with his next words. "If Memorial is reviewing medical imaging software, I'd like to make sure our company's proposal addresses those bias concerns properly." Amara accepted the card. "I'll reach out after the conference." They emerged into the terminal, the busy airport a stark contrast to the contained space they'd shared for the past 2 hours. Amara spotted Zoe and her mother waiting near the gate, clearly hoping for another word. "Go," James said, noticing her glance. "You have a fan waiting." He gave her a nod that contained more respect than any of his previous interactions. "Safe travels, Dr. Johnson. You as well, Mr. Whitfield," Amara replied. As she walked toward Zoe, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, not just from the confrontation with James, but from all the times she'd stayed silent. All the times she'd swallowed her hurt and anger to maintain peace or protect her career. Zoe beamed as Amara approached. "Dr. Johnson, Mom said I could ask you more questions if you have time." "I have a little time before my next flight," Amara said, smiling at Zoe's mother, who mouthed a grateful thank you. As they found seats at a nearby coffee shop, Amara glanced back toward the gate. James was walking away, phone to his ear, but she noticed something different in his posture. A thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. One conversation wouldn't change the world. It wouldn't erase years of bias or transform a company culture overnight. But it was a start. And sometimes, Amara thought as she turned back to Zoe's eager questions, that's all we can ask for. A start, a seed planted that might one day grow into something better. The conference hall buzzed with activity as hundreds of medical professionals networked between sessions. Amara checked her watch, 30 minutes until her keynote address. Her presentation was ready, her notes organized, but her mind kept drifting back to the flight and her conversation with James Whitfield. "Dr. Johnson," a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Amara turned to see Dr. Patel, her mentor from residency, approaching with a warm smile. "I've been looking everywhere for you." They embraced briefly. Dr. Patel had been one of the few who had truly supported Amara throughout her training, never questioning her abilities because of her race or gender. "How are you feeling about the keynote?" Dr. Patel asked. "Prepared," Amara replied, "though I had an interesting experience on the flight here that's still on my mind." As they walked toward the prep room, Amara recounted her conversation with James. Dr. Patel listened intently, nodding occasionally. "Unfortunately, that sounds all too familiar." Dr. Patel sighed when Amara finished, "though it seems like you might have actually gotten through to him a little." "Maybe," Amara said. "But one conversation doesn't change a lifetime of—" She stopped mid-sentence. Across the crowded lobby, a familiar figure in an expensive suit was speaking to one of the conference organizers. "James Whitfield. That's him," Amara said quietly. Dr. Patel followed her gaze. "The tech CEO? What's he doing at a neurosurgery conference?" "I have no idea." As if sensing her attention, James looked up. Their eyes met across the room, and after a moment's hesitation, he nodded in acknowledgement. The conference organizer seemed to say something else to him, then gestured toward where Amara was standing. James nodded and began making his way through the crowd toward them. "Dr. Johnson," he said as he approached, "I thought I might find you here." "Mr. Whitfield," Amara replied, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you at this conference." "I wasn't planning to attend," he admitted. "But after our conversation, I spoke with my development team about the medical imaging software we're pitching to hospitals." He glanced at Dr. Patel. "This is Dr. Patel, my former mentor," Amara introduced. "Dr. Patel, this is James Whitfield, CEO of Apex Technologies." They exchanged pleasantries, but Amara could see Dr. Patel's guarded expression. Her mentor had weathered her own share of prejudice in the medical field and could likely sense there was more to the story. "As I was saying," James continued, "I realized we hadn't properly considered the bias issues you mentioned. Our team is talented, but," he hesitated, "lacking in diversity, as you pointed out. I wanted to hear your keynote. I'm told it touches on technology integration and neurosurgery." "Among other things," Amara replied, still wary of his sudden interest. An announcement came over the speakers that the keynote would begin in 15 minutes. "I should go prepare," Amara said. "It was unexpected to see you here, Mr. Whitfield. Please call me James." He handed her a folder. "These are some preliminary outlines for our software. If you have time after your talk, I'd value your initial impressions. No pressure." Amara accepted the folder with a nod, then headed toward the preparation room with Dr. Patel. "What was that about?" Dr. Patel asked once they were alone. "I'm not entirely sure," Amara admitted. "Either a genuine attempt to do better or," she shrugged, "a business strategy. Either way, you've clearly made an impression." Dr. Patel squeezed her shoulder. "Now focus on your keynote. This is your moment." 15 minutes later, Amara stood at the podium, facing an audience of nearly 1,000 medical professionals. From the stage, she could see James sitting near the back, his attention focused entirely on her. She took a deep breath and began. Brain trauma remains one of the leading causes of death and disability worldwide, she started. But what if I told you that your patient's chances of survival might depend not just on their injury, but on who they are? She clicked to her first slide, showing disparate outcomes for different demographic groups with similar injuries. These disparities exist for many reasons: access to care, follow-up treatment, rehabilitation resources. But one factor we rarely discuss is how our own perceptions and biases affect the care we provide. For the next 40 minutes, Amara presented her research on pediatric brain trauma treatments, weaving in how unconscious bias could affect everything from initial assessment to treatment plans. She explained how her team had developed protocols to minimize these effects, resulting in dramatically improved outcomes for all patients, particularly those from marginalized groups. The human brain is complex, she concluded, but perhaps not as complex as the human biases that sometimes prevent us from seeing and treating each patient with the full measure of our skill and attention. Thank you. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Amara stepped away from the podium, her heart racing from the adrenaline of public speaking. As audience members approached with questions and congratulations, she noticed James hanging back waiting. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached. That was remarkable, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Amara replied, still riding the high of a well-received presentation. You've given me a lot to think about, James continued. Not just about our software, but about, he hesitated, about a lot of things. Before Amara could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A man in hospital scrubs burst into the hall, speaking urgently to one of the conference organizers, who immediately pointed toward Amara. The man rushed over. Dr. Johnson? I'm Dr. Chen from Chicago General. We have an emergency. 12-year-old with an acute subdural hematoma from a car accident. The family specifically requested you when they heard you were in town. Our neurosurgeon is in another emergency surgery. Amara didn't hesitate. I'll come right away. I can drive you, Dr. Patel offered, already gathering Amara's belongings. Wait, James said, pulling out his phone. My car's outside. We'll get you there faster than fighting for a taxi. Amara looked at him, surprised by the offer. Thank you. Minutes later, they were in James's luxury car, speeding toward Chicago General Hospital. Dr. Chen had gone ahead to prepare the patient for surgery. Tell me about the case, James said as he navigated through traffic. It helps me drive better when I understand the urgency. Amara quickly explained what a subdural hematoma was: blood collecting between the brain's protective layers, putting dangerous pressure on the brain tissue. In children, the symptoms can escalate rapidly, she explained. Minutes can make the difference between full recovery and permanent damage. James nodded grimly, expertly weaving through traffic. I had no idea neurosurgeons faced these kinds of emergencies. Every day, Amara said. It's why precision matters so much. Why there's no room for doubt or second-guessing in the OR. James was quiet for a moment, like the doubt someone might feel if their abilities are constantly questioned because of who they are. Amara looked at him, surprised by the insight. Exactly like that. They pulled up to the emergency entrance. Dr. Chen was waiting outside and rushed to open Amara's door. Thank you, Amara said to James as she gathered her bag. This was unexpected. Go save that child, Dr. Johnson, James replied. I'll wait. You don't have to. I want to, he interrupted. If that's all right. Amara nodded, then followed Dr. Chen into the hospital. Within minutes, she was being briefed on the patient, a young boy named Thomas whose family had seen Amara speak at a community health event months earlier. When they heard she was in Chicago, they had begged the hospital to call her. As Amara scrubbed for surgery, her mind cleared of everything except the task ahead. This was where she belonged, where all the doubts and prejudices of the outside world fell away, and only skill and knowledge mattered. Hours later, exhausted but successful, Amara emerged from the operating room to find James still in the waiting area, tie loosened, jacket draped over a chair. You're still here, she said, surprised. I wanted to know if the boy would be all right, he replied. He will be, Amara said, the relief evident in her voice. The surgery went well. No complications. James stood, genuine admiration in his eyes. I've spent my career building technology, thinking that was how I could make a difference. But what you just did, actually saving a life with your hands and mind, that's extraordinary. Different paths, different contributions, Amara said. Technology saves lives too when it's designed right. They walked together toward the exit, both exhausted from the day's events. I meant what I said about wanting your input on our software, James said as they reached the hospital doors. But now I'm wondering if we need more than just input. We need someone like you on our advisory board. Amara stopped, looking at him with surprise. Are you serious? Completely, James replied. What good is creating medical technology if it doesn't work for everyone? We need your perspective, Dr. Johnson. Not as a token, but as an essential voice. Outside, the Chicago night was cool and clear, the city lights reflecting off low-hanging clouds. In the span of a single day, a confrontation on an airplane had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. I'll consider it, Amara said finally, but only if your commitment to diversity extends beyond just me. James nodded slowly. It will. That's a promise. As they walked toward James's car, Amara felt a cautious optimism. Change rarely happened all at once. More often it came in small moments of connection, in conversations that forced people to see beyond their own limited perspectives. And sometimes, it started with a chance encounter at 30,000 feet. 6 months later, Amara stood at the podium in Apex Technology's main conference room, looking out at the faces of 50 young students from local high schools. Most were girls and many were from backgrounds historically underrepresented in medicine and technology. They watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration. Before I became a neurosurgeon, Amara said, I was a 12-year-old girl who loved science but rarely saw people who looked like me in the careers I dreamed about. From the back of the room, James Whitfield watched, arms folded, a small smile on his face. Beside him stood Zoe, the young girl from the airplane, and her mother. They had been specially invited to this event, the official launch of the Pathways program, a joint initiative between Memorial Hospital and Apex Technologies. Today, Amara continued, we're changing that story for all of you. This mentorship program will connect you with professionals in medicine and technology who can guide you, support you, and most importantly, show you that these spaces belong to you too. The students applauded, their excitement palpable. As Amara concluded her speech and invited the first panel of mentors to the stage, she caught James's eye. He gave her a respectful nod. After the formal presentations, the event shifted to a networking session. Students moved between stations where doctors, engineers, and scientists, many of them women and people of color, shared insights about their fields. Amara made her way through the crowd toward James, stopping frequently to answer questions from enthusiastic students. When she finally reached him, Zoe was already bouncing with excitement. Dr. Johnson! I got into the Science Magnet program, Zoe exclaimed. And Mom said I can join the hospital's junior volunteer program this summer. That's wonderful news, Zoe, Amara said warmly. You're already on your way, Zoe's mother smiled gratefully. Your email recommendations made a real difference. Thank you for staying in touch these past months. It's been my pleasure, Amara replied sincerely. After talking a bit more, Zoe and her mother moved on to speak with one of the cardiology residents. She's going to be a force to reckon with, James observed once they were alone. Future Dr. Zoe, with her determination? Absolutely, Amara agreed. They moved to a quieter corner of the room, away from the bustle of the event. It had been a whirlwind 6 months since their chance encounter on that flight to Chicago. What had started as a tense confrontation had evolved into an unexpected collaboration. The board approved the expanded diversity initiative this morning, James said. Full funding for the next 5 years, including 10 scholarships annually. That's excellent news, Amara replied. And the clinical trial adjustments? Also approved. We're redesigning the protocols to ensure diverse patient representation, just like you suggested. The research team is actually excited about it. They say it will make the data more robust. Amara nodded, satisfied. It will, and it will save lives. Through the glass walls of the conference room, they could see the Apex Technologies office floor, where employees worked at sleek workstations. The demographics had begun to shift, if slightly. More women, more people of color, more diversity of all kinds. We still have a long way to go, James admitted, following her gaze. Change doesn't happen overnight. No, it doesn't, Amara agreed. But it is happening. A notification chimed on Amara's phone, a reminder about her evening surgery. I should head back to the hospital soon, she said. Before you go, James said, there's something I wanted to show you. He led her to a smaller meeting room where a prototype of their new medical imaging system was set up. This is the latest version, incorporating all the feedback from your advisory committee. Amara examined the system with interest. What had started as a simple request for her input had grown into a diverse advisory board of medical professionals from various backgrounds, all contributing their perspectives to make the technology more inclusive and effective. The algorithm now accounts for variations in tissue density across different demographics, James explained. The initial results show a 40% improvement in early detection rates for conditions that are often missed in women and patients of color. Amara nodded, genuinely impressed. This will make a real difference, not if there's something else, James added, pulling out his phone. This just published today. He showed her an article in a major business publication. Apex Technologies leads industry push for inclusive medical AI. Amara scanned the article, which detailed how James's company had become an unexpected champion for diversity in medical technology, challenging other firms to follow suit. The piece mentioned their chance meeting but focused mainly on the tangible changes that had resulted. Looks like you're becoming something of a corporate crusader, Amara remarked with a small smile. James laughed softly. Hardly. I'm just trying to make better products. Turns out listening to different perspectives actually helps with that. He paused. Though I should thank you. For what? For not letting me off the hook that day on the plane. You could have just put on headphones and ignored me. Most people would have, Amara shook her head. I've done that plenty of times before. Sometimes it's the right choice for self-preservation. But that day? She glanced out at the room full of students. I saw Zoe watching. It wasn't just about you and me anymore. From across the main conference room, Dr. Patel caught Amara's eye and tapped her watch. Time to leave for the hospital. I need to go, Amara said. Surgery schedule. As they walked back into the main room, a young intern approached James with a question about the event. Amara watched as he engaged with the young woman respectfully, actually listening to her ideas. It was a small thing, but telling. Dr. Johnson, called a voice. Amara turned to see a reporter from a local news station. Could we get a quick interview about the Pathways program? We're doing a feature on initiatives to increase diversity in STEM fields. Of course, Amara agreed. As the reporter set up, Amara's phone chimed again with a text from the hospital confirming her surgery details. Ready when you are, Dr. Johnson, the reporter said, microphone in hand. Could you tell our viewers what inspired this program? Amara glanced around, at the eager students, at Zoe animatedly talking with a biomedical engineer, at James respectfully listening to his young intern. It started with a conversation, Amara began. A difficult one, actually. On a flight to Chicago 6 months ago, the reporter nodded encouragingly. I met someone whose perspective was very different from mine, Amara continued. We could have just ignored each other, stayed in our separate worlds. But instead we talked. Really talked. And that led to understanding, which led to action. And now this program will help dozens of students each year, the reporter supplied. That's the hope, Amara agreed. But it's about more than just this program. It's about what happens when we're brave enough to have uncomfortable conversations, when we challenge assumptions, including our own. As the interview concluded, Amara saw James watching from across the room. He gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, a simple gesture that contained a world of meaning. 6 months ago, they had been strangers with preconceptions about each other. Now they were unexpected allies in creating change. Dr. Patel appeared at her side. Ready to go? We have that spinal reconstruction in an hour. Ready? Amara confirmed, gathering her things. As they headed toward the exit, they passed Zoe and her mother. Dr. Johnson, Zoe called out. Will you be at the next mentorship session? I wouldn't miss it, Amara promised. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the plaza in front of the Apex building. Doctors and tech executives mingled with students and parents, creating connections that might shape careers and lives for years to come. Quite a different outcome than you might have expected from that flight. Dr. Patel observed as they walked to her car. Amara smiled, thinking back to that tense moment when she'd first sat next to James Whitfield. You know, in surgery we're trained to expect complications, to adapt when things don't go as planned. She looked back at the building where the event continued. Sometimes the unexpected path leads somewhere important. As they drove toward the hospital, Amara's phone pinged with an email. It was a message from a young doctor in training who had attended one of her talks. Dr. Johnson, I almost quit my residency last week after a senior physician questioned whether I belonged there. Then I remembered your story about standing your ground on that flight. I stayed, thank you for showing me it's possible. Amara smiled. One conversation, one moment of courage rippling outward in ways she couldn't have imagined. There would always be more barriers to break, more minds to change, more work to do. But today, at least, was proof that change was possible, one difficult conversation at a time.